one of the things that differentiates us from products like Copilot, but not just Copilot, but this kind of AI coding assistant in general, our product is called Cody, is the model choice. And you might say, oh, don't worry about it. GPT-4 is the best. As you can see on this leaderboard, I just pulled it from the leaderboard called lmsys.org. So don't worry about it. Just use GPT-4. But that doesn't tell the entire story. We're looking at the overall category here. If you go into the coding category, the top model currently is actually Claude 3.5 Sonnet. So if you're a logical person, you would say, I should actually use Claude 3. But if you're using a product that only lets you use one model that they think is right, then you don't have that flexibility. As soon as a new model comes out, as soon as it's better than the model that particular product is using, you don't have anything to do there actually. So that's one big difference that we have in our product, both for autocompletes as well as for chat. We always let you use the latest and best models, and we always let you experiment with different models so that you can use whatever model works the best for you. So that's a huge part of our product. But again, the other side of the equation is context, and that is the main topic of this talk. And the talk is called, as you can see, the evolution of a modern AI coding assistant. So the goal of this talk is to walk you through the whole journey of where we came from in terms of AI coding assistants in general, how we evolved over time, where we are in our particular product, and where we may be going in the future. So how does that sound? Good. Perfect. So this might sound a little bit basic to some of you at this point, but chances are you've already tried ChatGPT for coding a couple times. And I don't even have to ask this question at this point because chances are pretty much all of you have tried it for coding. And what you might have noticed is that it works really well for certain types of questions, certain types of template-like questions or basic questions, generic questions. How do I do this thing? What's the command for this thing? But then it doesn't always perform the best for other types of questions. And those types of questions are more specific questions about specific libraries, niche languages, maybe latest information, stuff like that. So here what I'm doing is I'm asking a question about an open source repo, right? Like in theory, it was part of the training data for ChatGPT, so it should be able to answer it correctly, but it can't. And here, I'm even emphasizing, in SourceGraph Cody, an open source repo, how do we currently convert text into embeddings? It gives me an answer that sounds right, but it turns out when you look into it, it's not quite correct. And that this is for an open source repo. If you're talking about a closed source repo, that's even worse because it doesn't even have a way of answering questions about a closed source repo. So that's where the idea of the modern AI coding assistant came from in the first place. It was this idea of let's put ChatGPT in your code editor. And that's not a bad idea. It's good to be able to stay in the context, stay in the flow of your coding environment so that you don't have to switch back and forth between your code editor and your browser, ChatGPT. And it also had this idea of I want to be able to chat about whatever I'm looking at, the currently open file. So that's how the modern AI coding assistant started in general, but it didn't have the ability of being able to answer a question about your entire code base. So that's why at SourceGraph, we created this product called Cody. This particular post is from 9 months ago. We pitched it as the AI that knows your entire code base. And I would say we're getting closer and closer to fulfilling this promise 100% on a daily basis. And we're going to see how we're doing that. But stepping back a little bit, we started the company SourceGraph 10 years ago with this product, Code Search. And it's essentially a search engine for your code base. And to make this product work effectively, we found that we need to develop a really good understanding of your code base. How is it connected to internally? How are different classes, functions, things like that connected internally? And we like to call that the code intelligence graph. So that's what we've developed. Even before LLMs, before ChatGPT, for over 10 years, for developing our Code Search product. And it turns out this is a perfect match for the recent advancement of large language models by combining the understanding of your code base through a graphical graph understanding with the recent advancement of large language models. We've been able to create a really compelling product that's Cody, that's an AI coding assistant. And that's the whole idea of Cody. By fetching the right parts of your code base to incorporate into your conversation with your favorite AI model, we're able to come up with much more accurate answers to your question than it would otherwise. So here I'm asking, just as an example, about the Cody repo. In this code base, how do we convert text into embeddings? The same question as before, and it is able to accurately answer. So over time, we found that context is really king when it comes to a product like this. By fetching the right context, incorporating the right context, the right amount of context, and assuming that your AI model is advanced enough so that it's able to take advantage of that context, then we can create a really compelling, really useful product. So again, that's what we're going to focus on in this particular talk. But I should also emphasize that that's not the only thing that we have. I don't want it to sound too much like a sales pitch, but we also have the ability to, again, choose your own LLM model, be used in pretty much any code editor you like, and also a way to create custom commands so that they fit your particular workflow, things pro developers would like. So we have a lot of these features, but again, context is a huge part of our product, and that's what we're going to focus on. And if someone asks me, can you explain how context fetching works, in this product, in this particular talk, I can't. And that's because it's actually a really complex product. I like to see almost like a mix of many products put together. We have autocomplete, where it gives you suggestions as you go. We have chat. We have the ability to do inline edits of your code, generating tests. Each of these features is so different from each other, and the requirements for each of these features are very different from each other, that I like to almost think of each of these features as its own product. So if I were to go through how context fetching works for each of these like sub-products, then it would take me about 30 to 40 minutes, which I don't have here. But luckily, I have published a blog post about it. Feel free to take a picture if you want. Google it later, find it. In this particular talk, I'm going to focus on how it works for chat in particular, because we have enough time for that. So how does context fetching work for chat? We combine a few different things here. We combine the conversation history, which we need to keep track of, so that the conversation makes sense as you go back and forth with the AI. And then we take the latest user query and use that to perform either an index search, or aka keyword search, or embedding search. And then we combine it with user-defined contexts. How does index search work in this particular context? Well, we take the user query and we ask an AI model what keywords should be used to perform a search for this particular query. And then once we get these keywords, let's say A, B, and C, we use each of these keywords to perform a search, gather these search rankings, and then give them to Cody to use as part of the context. Pretty cool, right? Similarly, we can do something similar with embedding search, I'm not going to go into what embeddings are exactly too much here, but the idea with embedding search is that you don't have to have exact keyword match. Even if you have like misspelling or things like that, as long as the meaning is there, we're able to find the right context, the right code snippets, relevant code snippets to your query using embedding search and vector search. So that's the overall architecture of our system for chat. One thing I want to emphasize here is the add mentions part. This is the feature that lets you, add particular files to your context. Add mention particular files so that you can ask, questions about those files so that you have a sense of control. And over time, we realized that the code base is not the only thing that needs to be understood, for you to work as a software engineer. You also need to, read linear issues or tickets, Jira tickets, Slack threads, and things like that. So we wanted to create an open way to incorporate those contexts outside of your code base into the chat with Cody. And that's why we developed this open protocol. Again, the emphasis on the word open, called Open Context. So this is a way for any developer to either use an existing context source, like here you can see even GitHub, Jira, Confluence, again, linear issues, all of these, or develop your own context source, whether it's your own blog post, maybe your style guide inside your company, and all of these things. So that's what we've done until the recent past, I would say, to bring us to the present. Some of the recent improvements that we've made include the ability to identify file names and symbol names in the user query. It sounds simple, but it turns out it's really useful. And also the ability to rewrite queries written in foreign languages into English, which it turns out works really well for context fetching. And finally, to close this talk with some of the future improvements that we're looking at this idea of asking AI what type of context to pull in the first place. Not just what keywords to use for search, but in the first place, should we even perform a search? Should we look at a file instead? Should we look at linear issues instead? That basically bringing that to a higher level. That's one idea we're looking at. Another one that I'm particularly curious about, excited about, is bringing us into more context in terms of more surface areas, more code editors, better web experience, maybe even ChatGPT, we'll see. And finally, one thing I'm personally interested in is the idea of caching. What if you could cache the entire code base into your context window so that you can ask questions about it over and over again, without costing a lot of money, basically. So some of these are, I should say, experimental, speculative, but I think there's going to be a lot of exciting things happening in this industry in general, but for coding in particular. So I'll just close this talk by saying context is really king. I think this applies not just to a coding assistant, but also to any AI product in general, any usage of AI, if you just want to use one of these AI tools, as well as in life, really. Context is very important. So if you want to give it a try, feel free to go to cody.dev and let us know what you think.